Hi, everyone. My name is Jinhe, and this is my presentation on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, otherwise known as IDEA, passed in 2004. IDEA originally passed in 1975 as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act and was later renamed to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Prior to IDEA's passage in 1975, students with disabilities were often excluded from the public school setting entirely and placed in alternative settings such as psychiatric facilities. Those who were in the public school setting were not able to participate in the general education curriculum with their non-disabled peers. IDEA was a landmark policy that remains the preeminent law overseeing special education within the United States to this day. IDEA 2004 was passed to correct some of the perceived errors and inequities that resulted following the passage of the original IDEA. Proponents of the law argued that students with disabilities would see improved outcomes as a result of this Improvement Act because it would decrease the overrepresentation and misidentification of students of color within special education, increase accurate identification through the use of the response to intervention model, and improve access to the general education curriculum for students with disabilities. IDEA originally was comprised of 8 main principles that were continued on to the Improvement Act. These are child-find, non-discriminatory evaluations, the Individualized Education Program, or IEP, access to a free and appropriate public education, the right to receive services in the student's least restrictive environment, access to related services, the rights for family to participate, and confidentiality. IDEA 2004 also included 2 additional mandates designed to remedy specifically the overrepresentation of students of color within special education. The first mandated that schools must accurately identify students for disabilities, and the second is that students of color face ongoing barriers to accessing services. This second mandate acknowledged these barriers to access, such as increased disciplinary measures that involve students of color who had IEPs. IDEA 2004 was also passed following the No Child Left Behind Act and included some key provisions to better align it with No Child Left Behind. The two main ways in which this was done was that it would increase the number of students with disabilities who participated in the high stakes testing, which would therefore mean that they were participating in the general education setting as well, and better access to highly qualified and effective teachers. The reason why policymakers wanted to address misidentification is because of the potential negative consequences. These negative consequences regarding misidentification within special education include lowered expectations by teachers and family members, restricted access to the general education curriculum, and restricted access to opportunities post-high school due to the lower graduation rates among students who have IEPs. As a result of IDEA 2004, there has been Following the implementation of IDEA 2004, there's been an over 30% increase in the number of students receiving special education services in the public school setting. This statistic has given rise to continuing concern over misidentification, particularly within the categories of specific learning disabilities, emotional disturbance, and other health impairments, which are all eligibility categories under IDEA. In regard to IDEA 2004's impact on educational equity, a study conducted by Zhang et al. Following the implementation of IDEA 2004 found that there was a significant increase in the number of Black students who were identified as having intellectual disabilities, as well as a slight decline in the number of Hispanic students identified as having disabilities. Hispanic is the word that they used in their study. There was also an increase in the number of Hispanic students qualifying for special education services under the category of specific learning disability, and they found that overall trends related to racial representation stayed mostly the same. When we continue to look at categories related to race and ethnicity, however, Asian students were found to be underrepresented within special education. In addition to the Zhang study, a study conducted by Artiles et al. In regards to specifically the overrepresentation of multi-language learners within special education in California, multi-language learners, otherwise known as English, sometimes known as English language learners or ELLs, were found to be 27% more likely to be placed in special education and were over-identified in the categories of learning disability and speech or language impairment. Further research found that multi-language learners who were not provided with any primary language support were 3 times more likely to be placed in restrictive environments like special day classes compared to their peers who were able to receive primary language support or instruction in a bilingual setting. Did ID 2004 meet its intended goal? I argue that it did not go far enough to improve outcomes for students of colors with disabilities. This is because of the alignment with No Child Left Behind and its reliance on standardized tests as a part of the special education referral process. We've discussed in the class the racist and eugenicist origins of these tests, and they are inherently biased. So requiring that students participate in these assessments is not going to be in the student's best interest. Additionally, a significant body of research points to the ongoing overrepresentation of certain racial groups within education. However, this data becomes more complex when we consider different within-group diversity data points, such as socioeconomic status, gender, and linguistic practices. Lastly, states and local districts, as we've discussed in this course, have significant control over the districts in their area. Because the federal government does not have the ability to enforce these policies more specifically at the national level, in order to better move towards educational equity for students of color with disabilities, if the federal government is truly hoping to implement IDEA 2004 with fidelity, there need to be more specific guidelines in place for states to identify overrepresentation, as well as what guidance given over what to do about that, while also recognizing the levels of individual diversity for each student. These are the policy recommendations that I've included to better improve educational outcomes and educational equity for students of color with disabilities. The first is to remove standardized testing as a measure of school performance. As we've discussed, standardized tests as well as intelligence tests have racist and eugenicist roots, and high-stakes testing is ultimately not in the best interest of students. Similarly, we must reevaluate the assessment tools that are used to qualify and identify students for special education services. These norm-referenced assessments are not normed against relevant populations and will not always give us accurate data. Furthermore, the staff members who administer these assessments should participate in mandated anti-bias training to accurately and to fully implement these assessments without including their personal biases. Thirdly, IDEA must be fully funded. IDEA has not been fully funded, and there is currently legislation and debate over fully funding IDEA as originally proposed. Because IDEA is not fully funded, the federal government lacks the resources and the ability to help improve educational outcomes, such as increasing teacher salaries, because as we have discussed, high quality educators will help to improve educational outcomes for students. This will also provide the federal government the judiciary resources to hold states accountable to meeting IDEA mandates. Lastly, because schools do not exist in a vacuum, the federal government must explore implementing comprehensive policies to address systemic inequities in other areas such as healthcare, and also to increase access to community resources. As we've discussed, race and class are inherently linked. And because students of color are primarily because most of these studies primarily look at students of color within special education, and a lot of these studies in particular look at Black students who are identified under the category of learning disabilities, it's critical that we also consider the impact of class and socioeconomic status on access to these critical early childhood centers as well as healthcare resources. Thank you so much for watching my presentation, and I look forward to reading your feedback.